Okay, Janelle Dumoulin joins us from Frankfurt. Andrea Heng from Singapore. Andrea, let's start with you. Just how flexible and effective will these measures be? Because analysts I've been speaking to say more of the same.
Well, that's probably because they're underwhelmed by the stimulus after such a nail-biting week. What they're doing is, what it seems to be that they're doing is adopting a long-term model for these measures to happen effectively so that interest rates can be kept at zero and not fall below that. So it does allow some, the long-term model allows some wiggle room for policy movements.
Some wiggle room, but does that give us any clear winners and losers out of this decision today?
Well, Ben, based on the menu, it looks like the banks tend to gain more than the economy directly, from the 2% inflation target to buying back 10-year government bonds. These are some of the things that will help bank earnings climb. This particularly will help the banks more, as I've said, but it does include the flexibility of dumping in as much money as they can into the economy by doing away with a monetary base target, for example.
OK, well, good news for banks. Their shares haven't been looking good of late. Janelle, over to you. I bet Frankfurt is watching very closely. It looks like you are too.
Yes, indeed. Frankfurt and I have been watching this quite closely. And for the most part, the market has reacted here pretty positively. Now, the Bank of Japan is seen as a bit of a trendsetter when it comes to monetary policy. And the fact that they're acknowledging that negative rates don't seem to have worked is giving hope to the market that central banks in general may be coming around to this view. So, and that's obviously been welcome news for the banking and financial shares, as you have both mentioned earlier. We saw, for example, here in Frankfurt, Commerzbank shares rise more than 3.5% on the news, and insurers like Allianz and Munich Re also have done comparatively well.
But isn't the big problem here in Europe, at least, that central banks have basically exhausted the limits of monetary policy? They don't have anything else that they can do, and it now puts the onus on governments to spend, which governments, in many cases here, are not doing, and that's got investors very edgy.
Yes, that's the other side of the coin. Investors are pretty edgy. Also here in Frankfurt, there is skepticism that whether this policy will work. One analyst I talked to this morning said the Bank of Japan's strategy is a bit like reacting to the sinking of the Titanic by rearranging the deck chairs. So it may look proactive, but it is not particularly helpful in the long run. And that is a sentiment that I heard echoed around here on the floor. And the long-term implications of the market are seen pretty much as negligible and minimal.
Janelle, staying with you for a moment, I guess the focus will now shift to the Fed. What can you tell us about what's coming up later today?
Well, Ben, nobody is really expecting the Fed to tighten policy this time around. Many more, however, are expecting a rate hike to happen in December, and everybody will be looking at the Fed's statement very closely to look for signals as to whether that will happen. Now, based on the comments that have been coming out of the Fed in the last weeks, though, we could definitely see that there's a bit of a divide between the more hawkish sides and the more dovish sides. And there are many factors contributing to this. Let's also not forget that this time around is a politically sensitive time for the U.S. We have elections coming up, and that has definitely reduced appetites to shake things up a lot. On the other hand, the longer that the rates are left unchanged, the greater the likelihood the market correction will be very, very painful. So many analysts are saying that the compromise will actually be no rate hike this time around, but a low bar for an increase before the end of the year.
And Andrea, the expectations from Asia?
Well, the initial reaction seems to be one of disappointment. They expected more of them from the bank to be more serious about the economy instead of propping up the banks. But I think people were generally looking to this announcement as a global economy boost. But it may have been wishful thinking because Japan, like the rest of us all, have a lot to do, and it has a long way to go.
A long way to go. Andrea and Janelle, thank you very much for giving us the lowdown.